All right, so the video quite a few people asked for, steel frame PDP versus CC Shadow. All right, so why this video? I'll start with that. This is probably one of the most popular guns in carry optics, and that's who this video is kind of geared toward, is competitive shooters. I myself am a competitive shooter, and with this platform and this platform, I don't think the market, you're kind of, I'll put it this way, you're being disingenuous to yourself and your actual training skill set if you're buying one of these and it's not geared towards competition use, right? Just get that out of the way now. I would say personally these are strictly competition guns and nothing else. So let's get into it. Again, reason for comparison, this is one of the more popular guns in carry optics right now. For good reason, it's an awesome gun. I ran this last season, since March until December when I picked this up. So got a few majors down with this, did pretty well with it. Did encounter a few issues. I will get into that later on. This I got, what, about 2 weeks ago now? I've got about 2,000 rounds through it, so this isn't gonna be like a cliche YouTuber review where I put 100, 200 rounds through it. And say it's the best gun ever. Now, few training sessions, couple matches already down with it. So I feel as if I can speak on it fairly well because I also ran the 5-inch plastic PDP for the 2022 season. Yeah, and put about 40,000 rounds through that. My carry gun is the 4-inch compact PDP. I've run this for 6 months now or so. Back to the Shadow though, I've got about 35,000 rounds through this last season since March when I picked it up. I like it a lot. It does leave a little bit to be desired in a few areas though. I'll get into that later. So the main thing right off the bat I think people are going to want to know is how does this shoot in comparison to how the Shadow shoots. A lot of people have tried the Shadow. It's a very, very nice shooting gun. Shoots very softly, but it is kind of, there's some things to be desired with the recoil on it, at least for me personally. That's personal preference matter. I will say right off the bat though, what a lot of people want to know is this, the steel frame PDP, the recoil is a little more, at least in terms of felt recoil, than the Shadow. So I'm sure that's gonna interest quite a few people. But the caveat to that, right, is how flat it shoots is comparable to the Shadow, if not a little bit better. So when it's actually shooting, the muzzle rise is less or comparable to what the Shadow is. Granted, you can tune these excessively with recoil setups, your own ammunition. This is just what I've got going now with 147 grain plated rounds clocking about 135 power factor. In the Shadow, I'm running an 11-pound progressive recoil spring, just standard recoil guide rod in there. Nothing really fancy. In this, I've got the ZR tactical guide rod with a 15-pound spring. At some point, I do want to try out their long stroke just to kind of see what that does. But yeah, right off the bat, the recoil on this, little softer in terms of felt recoil compared to the steel frame. But as far as like when you're actually watching dot behavior, how that dot is behaving during recoil, if you have a solid grip, it's very comparable, if not a little bit flatter in terms of how the steel frame shoots. It's also tracking in a more direct fashion, right? So the Shadow, there's so many factors in terms of recoil and your grip setup there. But with the steel frame PDP, the return on it is just boom, right back to the same spot, versus the Shadow setup, you kind of almost get a swirling pattern on that return. Just kind of, at least with my setup, that was kind of the nature, regardless of like how solid my grip was, that was just the nature of that return, is kind of a swirl and stop, versus the steel frame is just an immediate dead stop right on that spot where it just left if your grip is solid and you're doing what you need to be doing. So I'm sure that's probably interest to a lot of people in terms of how they actually feel to shoot. Let's see, balance and weight, right? So The steel frame PDP is roughly 2 ounces lighter than the Shadow, but obviously a lot of people, and that's just with the standard lock grips, no brass add-ons, no extra weight added. Same thing here. I've got the lock G10s, the regular size ones. I think they've got a thin. I don't think they have a additional size yet, and I'm sure they'll come out with brass at some point. But in terms of balance rate, it is a couple ounces lighter, but it's not nose heavy like the Shadow. Some people like that. I know some people don't, because it's got all of that extra weight up front. I know a lot of people put on the brass grips to kind of counter effect how that actually behaves, just so you've got more weight in the back end and it's not kind of naturally wanting to go forward. Overall, the balance is really solid on this. I really like the balance on the Shadow, but the nose heaviness is definitely not my personal preference. I made it work, but yeah. I tried a couple of the brass back straps, or grips rather, and never really found a pair that I liked. No. There's a lot of options out there. I just wound up sticking with the thin locks, which work well enough. They still don't fit the hands as well as I would like, and neither do any of the palm swells. Let's see. All right, so trigger. Yeah, so Shadow, obviously you have, if you're running it in carry optics, right, you have to start with a double action. So hammer fully down, right? We've got that long double action pull. This one, I'm not sure the weight on it. It's IPSC legal, so above 5 pounds. I know that much. Then you get the super nice semi-auto trigger. Or single action trigger, rather. So, very, very nice reset there. Super soft. That's probably mid to low 2 pounds. So that's very nice. This one, it comes stock with Walther's performance trigger, but I added the spring kit in there, which reduces the weight a little bit. So I think now it's clocking about 3.5 pounds. Super nice trigger, super flat. I do like the purchase I get on this a little bit better. I can reach it more kind of evenly versus the Shadow. I'm almost kind of hooking back to it a little bit, just with the nature of the grips and the angle, how my hand fits the gun. That's gonna be a little different for everyone. In terms of the trigger on the Shadow, you do have a little more ability to customize what you can do with the trigger. Hammer springs, actual trigger shoe, hammer itself, some of the internals. So that's a deep, deep rabbit hole that a lot of people have gone down. I didn't do too much, just an 11.5 pound hammer spring. This is the Armory Craft trigger in there. And then a Cajun Gunworks reduced power trigger return spring, which pretty good setup overall. I like it. Let's see. Yeah, in turn, while we're on that, so with the trigger return spring, right, I've had to replace that. I did it every 3,000 to 5,000 rounds on this, and like I said, I've got about 30,000 rounds on this, so I went through 5 or so of them. 5 or 6. Never broke one. I did have a slide stop break on this after about 20,000 rounds last month during a match, which was fun. Luckily on the last target of the last stage, so it's gonna happen. Not a bad spot. Yeah, so maintenance intervals on this too. I was swapping the recoil spring every 3 to 5 as well, because the degradation that happens when it starts to hit its kind of tail end is pretty dramatic, and you start to notice it very quickly in terms of return and felt recoil. So I would swap that, like I said, every 3 to 5K, or just as preventative measure within like a week or two of a major match, and then run 1,000, 2,000 through it, and then swap it immediately after the major match, which it's not a huge cost. They're like, the RC Tech progressive ones I'm running in here are like $10 a piece, but it's just a kind of an add-on cost. This, I've got, like I said, about 2,000 rounds on it now between a few training sessions and a couple matches in the last couple weeks. The 15-pound spring I have in here, I've not noticed any of the degradation in terms of felt recoil like I would have around 2K rounds on the Shadow. That's just the nature of the mechanics. I'm sure there will be some springs that will degrade a little more quickly as more aftermarket parts come out for this. So back to the trigger, right, is the Shadow's got the super customizable trigger as far as a lot of gun platforms go. This one, not so much. I think you could probably swap out the shoe for the stock shoe that comes on your standard plastic ones. This one does have the DPT in there, but I think I've seen a couple people put those in. I don't know if the Overwatch Precision ones fit in here, if you prefer that feel. But in terms of internals, you're fairly limited in terms of what you can actually do. The Springco kit, as it stands, is kind of about what you've got. I did try one of the reduced power striker springs in here because I was trying an 11-pound recoil spring just to kind of play around with that. Didn't work, had light strikes within the first mag, so I didn't even finish that mag. The 11-pound recoil spring, kind of a negligible difference in terms of felt recoil and actual behavior of the gun compared to the 15. But if you want to run a lighter spring, even a 13-pound, which I've tried, not a fan of, you will likely need to find a solution for the lockup issues that happen, because with the lighter springs, it does kind of want to hang out a battery a little bit. It doesn't with the 15, but with the 11 and the 13, it kind of slowly goes in. And with the 11, you can shake it out. So not what I would want to run in terms of a match where you're running around and you might shake that out of battery and have it hang up, come up to a target, dead trigger. Yeah, so what else? Yeah, so back to maintenance. I kind of briefly touched on the maintenance intervals I did with this. Preventative maintenance is needed on the platform to actually keep it running and not have it go down in a match. I had quite a few issues with this gun in terms of actual reliability. The main one was always in relation to the trigger bar return spring. So what was causing that was it was out of tune. So I would get failure to reset, where the trigger would just kind of hang back and I would have to push it forward, or it would have a delayed reset, which not great. I had that happen at the last major I shot, the North Florida sectional. So that was pretty exciting, especially on a fixed time stage. That went very well. Yeah, so preventative maintenance is key with the Shadow platform. I know a lot of people who run these, they do the 2-gun system where you've got your training gun and maybe your local match gun, and then you've got your major match gun. Some people run 3, but yeah. The spare parts kit for this is just a backup Shadow. That's kind of the running joke, is these are and can be very temperamental guns, especially once you start kind of fucking around with all of the internals in there, which most people wind up doing. So let's see, aftermarket, right? So in terms of holsters and other accessories, this has been around since what, 2016, I think it was. And then you've got the previous gen Shadow before that. So the aftermarket on this is fairly extensive, as well as you know, customization and whatnot, like grip panels. There's a dozen different options there. Everything, hammer, safety, slide stop, mag release, trigger, internals. You've got quite a few options in terms of what you want aftermarket wise. Same for base pads, holsters, all of that. This fairly limited out the gate right now. The aftermarket for the plastic, it's picked up since when I first got this, early 2022. So it's a little bit better now. More holsters and whatnot available. But the holster that I picked up, which is meant for the plastic from Carry Concealment, did not work very well with the steel frame. So I'm sure companies will update as they go along, but I think it's due to the dimensions on the frame appear to be slightly different. You have this takedown lever that does not exist on the plastic guns. And then the actual rail here is slightly different in shape and dimension. I haven't actually taken calipers out and measured, but that is something to consider. Is if you get a holster for it that's meant for the plastic, it may not work. It only took me some quick dremeling to kind of go in on the bottom segment here where the rails touch, because what was happening is it was pushing into the top of the holster and snagging, and then a little more quick dremeling on the inside for that slide takedown lever. Pretty simple fix, took like 30 seconds, couple minutes, not much, but something to consider. Again though, I'm sure companies will update as things kind of go along and they actually get these into actually mold holsters for. Whether or not you'll have cross compatibility between the holsters is beyond me. Okay, yeah. So base pads, right, is, I don't have any here, but I know the Hennings don't work on this one. They changed up the backstrap, this backstrap panel a little bit to where this kind of magwell component is slightly different to where the shape of the Hennings don't work. I'm running the Taylor Freelances currently and those are running fine. So I would just go for those until Henning gets an update if you pick up this platform. The Shadow, obviously there's probably 10 different companies making base pads. There's probably a few others that work in this. I know Springer Precision makes some. I do have the Parker Mountain ones, the +3s. Those run perfectly fine. They fit well. Who else? Yeah, I'm not sure. There's a few companies though. Let's see. But yeah, the aftermarket on this currently, Lock has the grips. So you've got, I think, 2 size options there. I'm sure at some point you'll have a few more. They'll probably do brass and a few different textured options. Right now, these feel really good. They're much better than the factory ones, which are pretty slick. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the aggressive bogey pattern from Lock, which is super aggressive. The ones that come on this gun stock are basically a removable panel of this grip texture that comes stock on the plastic guns. It's good, but in terms of a comp gun, I want a little more aggression there. Like with a carry gun, it's fine, where it's a little slick because I don't want that rubbing against me. But yeah, on the comp gun where that's not an issue, definitely want more aggression there. I would like a little more customization in terms of grip panels and kind of the actual pattern of them and shape, because I know you've got quite a few options with the Shadow in terms of how you want to do your grip panels. If you want to do like a swell on one side, thin on the other, vice versa, and then there's various different swell options out there. I never really found the swells to fit me well. The thins don't feel great either. It's just none of the companies, I don't know, like they're developing good stuff, but it's not what I'm looking for, which like I made this work, but I would have preferred, like in terms of grip texture, right, is I would have preferred like more of a swell up here versus a swell down here where Lock does it. I know Patriot Defense does one up here and I've tried that, but it didn't feel that great either. But yeah, right now Aftermarket's fairly limited on this. I don't know how that's going to pick up in the coming months and years. I guess it depends on kind of demand. But yeah, you've got the recoil systems cross-compatible with the plastic guns, and I've run the ZR system in this one and my 5-inch as well. 0 issues with the 15. I ran the 13 in the 5-inch for a minute. No problems with it, but again, the lockup was kind of iffy with the 13 in there, so I just put the 15 back in. Like I said, I'm not a fan of how the 13 feels in the steel frame. It felt good in the 15, but the lockup issues caused me to swap back. In this, the 13, it feels too fast on the actual recoil in terms of how slow it is going forward. So it's like, it's a bad balance between the two. I don't know. It's kind of hard to describe until you actually shoot it. The biggest thing though between these two is going to be the price. Yeah. So the Shadow, I know these, you see them around sometimes for the optics ready model. What, like 1050, 1100-ish, maybe 12 on the high end when they're on sale from a few places. You can get the non-optics ready model. I think PSA's had them to where they're like 9 something. So you get that, a couple $100 on a mill job and you're good to go. So this, I've seen current pricing is sitting at about $17.99. I have no idea how that's going to adjust. I know Walther kind of price controls pretty well, which is fair. They don't have companies undercutting, but I don't know how that's going to kind of even out as time goes on, because these are, again, brand new, so MSRP is going to be MSRP, and there's not much anyone can really do about that in the meantime. I anticipate they will come down at some point in the future. I don't know by how much, because I know standard retail on these where they're not on sale is about 15, which if you're paying 15 for this, shouldn't be. And this gets down to about 15, I think that puts them more on kind of a level playing field in terms of price. Of course, that's going to be dependent upon you and your financial situation. Some people look at that, some people don't care. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah, so price is pretty much going to be the biggest one here. I think that's going to make it or break it for a lot of people. Is the steel frame PDP worth more money than the Shadow? I'm not going to answer that question for you. I think that's something you have to answer for yourself. I would say if you could shoot one of these side by side with one of these, do it. Kind of compare the two, see how they fit in your hand, because at a certain point, a lot of this becomes subjective to your personal preference, right? Some people are fine with the little more recoil that this may have in terms of felt recoil in the hand, and trade out for losing the double action, getting a crisp single action trigger, and then also too, little more forgiving in terms of like reloads, a few other things, and then just like the actual recoil pattern too is, I think, a little bit better with this. Again, this is softer, so if you're not in tune with your skill enough to be able to kind of read into recoil super deeply, this will probably appeal to a lot more people than this. But I think kind of the higher end, where you're really paying attention to the dot behavior and how flat the gun shoots, ignoring kind of the felt recoil, this will appeal to people on that end. That's about it. Any questions, drop them in the comments below. I'll try and get to them. I may do an Instagram live at some point, kind of breaking down this a little bit more and take actual questions from people, because I'm sure there's quite a few things I missed in terms of this. I didn't want to turn this into like a cliche Instagram or YouTube review where we're talking about features here, like, oh, the mag button feels like some sexual analogy, the slide levers, this, that. No. I wanted to talk about how this shoots, in terms of how this shoots, and then obviously the few other things that I touched on as well. Hopefully I nailed quite a few of people's questions. Again, drop some comments below. I will probably save those, not answer them there, and then try and answer them in an Instagram live, kind of a more informative avenue for doing that, and then take questions as it goes. All right, so I will leave kind of this decision up to you. I'm not going to say one way or another, buy this. That's not what I'm here for. Go train. At the end of the day, you make more of a difference than whatever gun you're shooting. All right, so one thing I do want to add is, people will probably ask this, is what am I picking? Right now, I don't know long term, but I will say I am going to be running this for at least the next few months to get a better feel for it. I'll probably push it to 10 to 20K, somewhere in that range. So like within the next 6 months. I may stick with it through the season just to kind of get a better feel for it. And then long term, I don't know. I'm sure CZ may drop a Shadow 3 at some point, because this is like 2016, I think this came out. So we'll see. But yeah, I'm probably going to run this for the 2024 season, if not about like the first half of it. And I'm just gonna feel it out a little bit more and go from there.